Hello, my name is Alexis Amos, and I am presenting my Cultural Solutions project for Health 623. For my project, I chose the country of Mozambique, and I chose this country because it is so diverse. There's diverse wildlife and plants, and the ethnic categories in Mozambique are also quite diverse. There was some instability a few decades ago because Mozambique is a melting pot of a lot of different African tribes and people groups and cultures, but those have kind of stabilized over the past few years. Um, However, with this diversity comes a lot of problems health wise. There is no such thing as a one size fits all approach where just throwing an intervention out there will affect everybody. Because of their different beliefs and practices, each intervention has to be tailored to that specific group. So there are a lot of problems overall affecting Mozambique, but the two major ones I want to focus on in this presentation are high fertility rates and high morbidity and mortality rates. So the first are there are six cultural problems affecting high fertility rates. The first three are right here. Low modern contraceptive use. A study published by the National Institute of Health found that only about 15% of Mozambicans use modern contraceptives. They do choose to use a contraceptive. A lot of times it will be a traditional plant or herb, but these are not always effective and they can be sometimes more harmful than helpful. Secondly, is gender inequality and social pressures. Women are seen as inferior and can be forced into having sex without using contraceptives by their partner, and this can lead to an increased number of pregnancies and higher fertility rates. Thirdly, is lack of access to contraceptives. About 64% of Mozambicans live in rural areas, and of those, more than 60% have zero access to medical facilities or modern medicine. So these are not the only things affecting high fertility rates. Here are three more cultural factors. Fourthly, is low rates of education, both formal and informal. Formal meaning schooling, informal meaning just regular conversations. The topic of contraceptives and sex is taboo in Mozambican culture. So even if women don't learn about it in school, then they can't talk about it with their friends or um, really anybody. So this leads to a decreased knowledge of how to use contraceptives and how to space out your births, meaning more babies and a higher fertility rate. Fifthly is early marriage. About 14% of Mozambican girls are married by age 15, and 48% of Mozambican girls are married by age 18. So if you get married earlier, you have more time to have babies. Basically, is the equation that works out to be. A final aspect affecting the high fertility rates seen in Mozambique is early childbearing. The Mozambican woman, on average, has her first baby at 18.9 years of age, and throughout her lifetime, will have on average 3.97 children. So, again, getting married earlier means you have more reproductive years. Having your first baby early means you can also have more years to have children, and without knowledge of how to use contraceptives or birth spacing, it just equals a higher number of children and therefore higher fertility rates in Mozambique. Um, Besides fertility rates, there is also increased numbers of morbidity and mortality within Mozambique. First is the HIV/AIDS prevalence. In 2018, there were 2.2 million Mozambicans living with HIV/AIDS, which is second highest in the world. South Africa is the only country that's any higher. Secondly, is neonatal disorders. For every 1,000 live births, there are 28 deaths for neonates in Mozambique. Thirdly, are communicable diseases and the toll that they take on Mozambicans. Tuberculosis is a huge problem. It's comorbid with HIV/AIDS. So a lot of times you'll see these two together and they really do impact morbidity and mortality rates. Malaria is also a huge problem. It's the fourth leading cause of death in the country. And finally is death from diarrhea. It mainly affects children under 5, and even if they don't die, a lot of times it will create a cycle of malnutrition and infection that will last the child his entire lifetime. So here are some goals that I want to achieve to reduce fertility rates and morbidity and mortality rates in Mozambique. First is increase access to and usage rates of modern contraceptives, decrease gender inequalities and social pressures, increase education levels, and decrease rates of early marriage and childbearing. Those 4 apply to the high fertility rates, but the final 2 are goals I want to achieve to combat high morbidity and mortality rates. And those include decreasing the burden of HIV/AIDS and neonatal disorders, as well as decreasing rates of tuberculosis, malaria, and diarrhea. So those are all really great goals, but they are very broad and not specific at all. And for a goal to be successful, we need it to be more detailed and more focused. So that's why we're going to use SMART goals. SMART is an acronym, and the S stands for specific. Who, what, where, why, when, how. M is for measurable. Is this goal quantifiable in any way? A is for attainable. Is this goal a realistic one? Can we achieve it? R is for relevant. Would I want to spend a huge portion of time and money addressing obesity in Mozambique when it's not really a problem, or should I use and put that effort into addressing the problem of HIV and AIDS or diarrhea death? Finally, is it a timely goal? Is it something that is time bound that I can achieve in a realistic amount of time? So here are 6 SMART objectives for combating high fertility rates. First is to develop a 25% increase in use of modern contraceptives within 2 years. Modern contraceptive use is about 15%, so 25% increase would take overall contraceptive use up to about 19-20%, which is still low, but is overall an improvement than where it was. And within 2 years, I feel like that's a realistic goal. Secondly, is to increase open conversations with doctors about contraceptives by 20% within 3 years. So encouraging doctors to bring this up when they are having their regular visits with both men and women, encouraging men to talk to their wives about contraceptive use and how to have safe sex, and encouraging women also to provide contraceptives and to make sure they're doing the best they can to reduce those gender inequalities and create a better sexual experience and also hopefully reduce fertility rates. Thirdly is to increase access to modern contraceptives for all by adding a clinic every 50 miles by 2030. Lack of access to modern contraceptives is a huge problem that really contributes to the high fertility rates. So having a clinic in the center of a 50-mile radius all over the country will allow equal access for all Mozambicans. Fourthly is to equalize gender inequalities regarding literacy and raise overall literacy rates to 75% of the population by 2035. About 50% of women in Mozambique are literate, and about 72% of men in Mozambique are literate. This is a huge gender gap, so I want to equalize those and then raise them both to 75%. It seems like quite a jump, especially for women, but I think encouraging and really educating people about the importance of women's education will really help to raise a generation of new Mozambicans who are quite literate. Fifthly is to reduce rates of marriage for children under 18 to 30% within 5 years. 30% is still kind of high, but there are a lot of tribes and people groups in rural Mozambique that still practice this, so really reaching out to them will help to reduce early rates of marriage. Finally, is to raise the average age a woman has her first child to 20 years of age and lower the average number of children in a family to 3 by 2035. Both those things working together should help to combat the high fertility rates in Mozambique. And here are some SMART goals for combating high morbidity and mortality rates in Mozambique. There's 5 of them. First is to reduce overall prevalence of HIV/AIDS by 15% by 2030 and reduce the number of new cases of HIV/AIDS by 50% by 2025. This seems like quite a jump, but HIV/AIDS is a huge problem in Mozambique, so I really would like to tackle that first and just head on and go for it. So reducing incidence and prevalence of this this disease will really help to reduce morbidity and mortality related to it. Secondly, is to decrease number of neonatal deaths to 20 deaths per 1,000 live births by 2025. Currently, it's at 28 deaths per 1,000 live births, and 20 deaths per 1,000 live births is still relatively high worldwide, but it is an improvement on the rates currently seen. Thirdly, is to increase tuberculosis detection levels to 50% by 2035. So detection rates for TB currently are at about 37% in Mozambique. So by 2030, I really would like to raise those to 50%. Fourthly, is to reduce the number of deaths due to malaria to 50% of its current level by 2030. Malaria is endemic within the country of Mozambique, and I really would like to, again, hit that hard and really just focus on reducing deaths related to malaria. And fifthly, is to decrease diarrheal deaths by 25% by 2025. Again, diarrhea mainly affects children under 5, so I really would like to work within that age group to really reduce morbidity and mortality related to that. Here's just a slide of a school in Mozambique because I really want to emphasize that education is the key to breaking the high fertility rates and high morbidity and mortality rates seen in Mozambique. We can do these short-term interventions by providing contraceptives and by giving antiretroviral therapy or ART for those living with HIV/AIDS, but really teaching people how to prevent this problem in the first place or how to work with what they've got is really going to be the key. Teaching them how to clean their water and how to prevent the spread of diarrhea by washing their hands, stuff like that will really want that to be a focus of this public health intervention. But a public health intervention is only as good as the money we have. So here are 4 potential funding sources. I have 40% coming from donations, whether that's large corporations or private contributors. I want that to be a good portion of the budget. We have 25% coming from fundraising and another 25% coming from fees from goods and services from the government. And finally, 10% from government grants. So whether that's the United States government, whether that's the Mozambican government, anybody who wants to get involved and really wants to make a difference in Mozambique, using those grants will be very effective. And here's our budget. I'm going to go over this pretty quick because on the next slide I have a more spelled out version of this budget. But the majority, 32% of the budget will be spent on educational seminars, 28% will be spent on volunteer pay, 20% on salaries and wages, 8% for equipment and supplies, another 8% for travel expenses, and 4% for miscellaneous. So, educational seminars. That's the majority of the budget because education is the heartbeat of this intervention. So, take-home pamphlets, demonstration items, booklets, tangible items that these people can make notes in as they're learning and take home that have instructions. These things will really be helpful to solidify the education they're being given. Volunteer pay is incentives for community health workers and others involved, whether that's religious leaders, community leaders. Financial incentives have been shown to be very effective in helping people to get involved to better the health of them and the community around them. Salaries and wages will be for full-time staff. Equipment and supplies, things like office supplies, tents to hold meetings in, technology, travel expenses, flights, rental cars, hotels, food, travel insurance. And finally, a small portion of the budget is for miscellaneous, unexpected expenses, accidents, they happen, so you got to be prepared. However, a public health intervention is only as good as its program evaluation. An evaluation will help us know how good we've been doing in the past, but also how to better it. So the first thing is to determine if the SMART goals for combating high fertility rates are being met. Making sure that we have these goals, they're being met, that they are realistic, that they're still specific and attainable. Secondly is to determine if the SMART goals for combating high morbidity and mortality rates are on track. Making sure, again, that these goals are specific, that they're measurable, that they're attainable. And finally is to determine if the inflow and outflow of revenue based on the budget is operating effectively. Are proportions of the budget where they're supposed to be? Do we need to adjust anything? like I said, a successful program evaluation will not only tell us how well we've been doing, but how to better ourselves in the future. So here are my resources. There's 3 pages of them, but thank you for listening, and I hope this has given you a bunch of education on how to understand how to better the health of those living in Mozambique.